He will be explaining his presentation.
Does this one work here? Okay, great. All right, well, good to be here. Thank you for the warm reception. I will start out by saying that I am a software engineer. I am not a public speaker, and I'm not a politician. So I could probably learn more from you guys when it comes to politics than you could learn from me. But I've had some unique experiences the last few months, and I can share those with you and share a glimpse into kind of a front row seat, close-up look at what's going on in Utah politics. So to get started, I just want to tell you a little bit about me and my background so you know where I'm coming from. Let's see here. I'm having technical difficulties. Okay, so I served a Mormon mission years ago, and when I got home from my mission, one of the first things that I did is I started this little business, dearelder.com. Have any of you guys ever used it? Tried a missionary? Cool. So I started that, and when I started this business, I didn't know how to code at all. And so I went out, and I didn't have any money. I'm a poor farm boy from Montana. I couldn't afford to hire a programmer. And so I realized that the only way that I was going to start this business is if I learned to code myself. So I was in the business school, so I went over and signed up for some classes in the computer science program at BYU. And started learning what I needed to build this website. And as I did it, as I built it, I learned that I have a real passion for efficient systems, which some people hear, they're like, man, you need to get out more. That sounds so boring. But like, if I can go into a business and find a way to automate workflows and to really make that business efficient, that absolutely is my passion in life. And so I went on after I started this business, and I founded a company called Entrada, which what we do end-to-end systems for apartment communities. So everything from accounting to payment processing to, I guess, taking rent online, processing work orders, handling invoices, all of these things, we just completely automate apartment communities. And again, this is my passion. So this is, you're probably wondering why I'm talking about this. And the reason is because in 2010, I showed up for the first time to a caucus meeting. I heard about these weird things. And so I showed up, and lo and behold, a bunch of people I went to church with were there, my neighbors were there, and so a few people that I didn't know were there. And I sat down and we started talking, we started debating, and I made the mistake of opening up my mouth and sharing some of my perspectives on politics. And so I quickly got nominated and elected to become a state delegate and a county delegate in 2010. Now, 2010 was a big year for the Caucus-Convention System. And so I got to have a front row seat to see the Bob Bennett, the Mike Lee, and the Tim Bridgewater thing all play out. And I, like many of you probably in this room, I was one of these kind of anti-incumbent, anybody who voted for TARP, let's switch them out and get somebody new. And so my instant focus, for whatever reason, was on Tim Bridgewater and on Mike Lee. And so I came to this very library and heard them speak multiple times. I went to many Meet the Candidate events. I actually went to Mike Lee's house for some little event. And it was a really fascinating experience for me to see how the caucus convention process works. I thought it was fascinating that I got to actually meet these, big dog politicians, that I got to hear them speak. And despite hours, literally hours and hours and hours of research on just one race, Mike Lee and Tim Bridgewater, I could not figure out who the heck I wanted to vote for. And so I started doing some serious research, and I dug in deeper and deeper, and I found out that, and I'm not saying for a second here Tim Bridgewater's a bad guy, but I found out that Tim Bridgewater had spent a lot of time in his career consulting companies on how to get government grants. So I'm like, okay, well, that's more than enough to knock you out of contention for my, analysis. And so I threw all my weight behind Mike Lee. And it was shocking to me that even among delegates, how few people knew. We have a pretty small window of time to do our research.
And it was surprising to me how few delegates knew any of this. And so I went and put up a billboard in Lehigh, and I had a tiny little business at the time. Like, I could not afford this billboard, but I put up a billboard called bridgewaterfacts.com, and never called the Mike Lee campaign, never consulted with them, just put up a billboard, put up a blog, and just shared what I had found, and ended up getting like 500 unique visits per day to this website. And it was months after the election, when Mike Lee eventually won, that he was having some event up at a park in Draper, and I went up and I said, hey, because he's from Lehigh, so I assume he'd seen the billboard. I'm like, hey, do you know who put that billboard up? And he's like, no, I've been trying to find out. And I'm like, that was me. So anyway, I have a tendency, if you haven't noticed, to get sucked into things. So here I am today. But anyway, going back to my original comment that I love analyzing and creating really efficient systems, the reason why I love the Caucus-Convention system is because it's so efficient. As I got involved in this process of funding the party and funding this lawsuit to preserve the Caucus-Convention system, I wanted to know, I did various pieces of research, just like I did when I started my businesses, to make sure I wasn't investing my money poorly. One of the things that I did is I reached out to hundreds of both people voters in the general election, and then I reached out to hundreds of state delegates. And I asked them, how many hours do you spend in an average election cycle vetting candidates or issues in the 1 year preceding a general election? And the median result that I got back from the people who vote in the general election was 3 hours. 3 hours, okay? So the time you guys spend in this room today is the time that most people spend in an entire election cycle vetting candidates or issues. The median response that I got back from state delegates was 97 hours. So you can see there's this massive, massive differential between the time that's spent vetting candidates between delegates and the general election population. So if you take that, and we had a physician up here, Mr. Kennedy, if you compare, juxtapose this 3 hours versus 97 hours, and you take it and you look at it from the perspective of hiring somebody that's going to do brain surgery for you. Because I learned just in the Lee Bridgewater campaign, it is a complicated process to vet these candidates. You don't vet candidates by watching a 30-second clip on the news. So if you compare it to picking a brain surgeon, the difference is, so it takes about 20,000 hours to get through residency and all that to become a brain surgeon. It's like choosing somebody to do brain surgery that's still in the first semester of their freshman year. That's the difference in what they've been exposed to, okay? You think about it from the standpoint of a financial advisor. When you go out and choose a financial advisor, you want somebody with a lot of experience, right? You want to gravitate toward this highly educated end of financial advisor. So you're going to pick somebody that has 97 hours putting together portfolio packages for you, or somebody that spent 3 hours doing it. I mean, it's just obvious, right? That delegates can dig so much deeper. To me, case in point, John Curtis. Whether you like him or you don't like him, he was the former chair of the Democrat Party in Utah County. How many people knew that at the general election or even in the primary versus people that knew at the state convention? And so you get he gets 11% of the vote at the state convention, and he gets an overwhelming amount of support in the primary, and ends up, well, not overwhelming, he got 41%. And so it just goes to show that there's a lot of value in the time that delegates spend rigorously vetting the candidates. And this system that we have is great. No system's perfect. I could probably tell you 10 things that I'd like to change about the Caucus-Convention system, because I think we can make it a lot better. But we have a lot of people that want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And it is not good for Utah. We've had 100 years where Utah's thrived as a state under a Caucus-Convention system. And it's so fascinating to me that we're going to throw it out and get rid of it. Now, having seen how well the Caucus-Convention system works back in 2010, I decided, well, I trust this system implicitly. I trust it so much I really don't feel like I need to be involved. So I went back to building software for 7 years. And that's how much I trusted the system. And so then I hear about this, I heard about SB 54, I heard about what was going on. I'm like, surely people are gonna step up and finance this lawsuit. The debt got deeper and deeper in the party. The donors stopped donating to the party. And eventually I heard, and I had people kind of bugging me because they knew I'm a fan of the Caucus-Convention System. They started bugging me, hey Dave, you gotta step forward and help with this. And I'm like, somebody else will do it. Surely someone else will do it. Well, nobody stepped up. And I heard this last November that Chairman Anderson decided that he was going to unilaterally drop the lawsuit. And the reason he explained for doing this was because he said that for financial reasons we need to drop it. Well, we had done all the litigation required to get a decision from the 10th Circuit. Every penny had been spent in legal fees. We were just waiting for an answer. It was like we bought a lottery ticket, and all we had to do is scratch off the silvery lining, right? Well, Rob Anderson, for financial reasons, was going to throw the lottery ticket in the trash and never scratch it off to see if we won. And if we won, we'd get all of our legal fees would be paid back by the state. So there's no reason whatsoever to drop the suit, but for some reason we're dropping it. It made no sense to me. So that's what triggered for me to step forward and to get involved in this. And so, again, speaking of market research, I went out and I wanted to know, does the Republican Party really support the Caucus-Convention System? Because I don't want to invest hundreds of thousands of dollars in this and then have the State Central Committee drop the lawsuit. So the first thing I did is I reached out personally in many cases, and I had a couple of people helping me, to survey every single member of the State Central Committee to find out where do they stand on the Caucus-Convention System. And many of you have heard of the pejorative Gang of 51, okay? So, which is a complete farce. I got responses back, and I didn't just take their word for it, I vetted it and made sure other people were like, yeah, that's really where they stand. But I got 101 out of 140 members of the State Central Committee that are ardent supporters of the Caucus-Convention System. This Gang of 51 business is a complete illusion that's being created to try to make what is mainstream GOP in Utah look extreme. And it's just not the reality. It's not what's going on. So, and I hope you guys can see that. I hope you guys, that there's been enough information put out there that you can see that. So here I was, I stepped in. So what I said is, well, I will fund the lawsuit going forward. And people told me, well, this back debt is really dragging the party down as well. So I said, you know what? I'll see what I can do. I'll see if I can negotiate down the debt of these attorneys and get the debt paid off, the back debt too. So I signed an agreement with Chairman Anderson. And my big concern was, despite Chairman Anderson's election speech in Davis County where he said that he was going to see the lawsuit through to finality, that was his speech when he ran. When he ran for chairman, he promised all of the delegates that I am not the count my vote candidate. And yet his desire to drop the lawsuit unilaterally made me nervous. And so I wanted a contract. And I knew there was overwhelming support from the State Central Committee to continue the lawsuit. And so I signed a contract with him that, hey, as long as the State Central Committee is in the driver's seat and that we don't have a chair who just wakes up one morning and wants to drop the lawsuit, then I will pay all the back debt, which I've done, and I will pay all of the litigation costs going forward, which I am now doing. But I didn't stop there with my research. So I looked further, and this is where it really started to surprise me as I wanted to poll state delegates. Some of you may have got the polls, but I robocalled state delegates, and I asked them, are you in favor of a single path caucus convention system, or are you in favor of this dual path system that's been created? And from state delegates that I surveyed, 72.9% out of 950 state delegates that responded said they're in favor of a single path caucus convention system. So look at that. Like, almost identical representation on the state central committee as the delegates who elected them. Well, I guess county delegates technically, but from delegates. So then I went one step further and I got a list of all of the people that attended caucus meetings going back in 2016, 160,000 people. And I did a simple random sample survey of 1,000 people in that audience and got results back. And this is what really shocked me, is that 82.9% of the caucus convention, or the caucus attendees also were in favor of a single path caucus convention system. So isn't it odd that all of us, every time we open the newspaper, read about these right-wing nut extremists that are trying to save and support the caucus convention system? It is not reality. It is this tactic that, and I've started to learn, and again, I'm not experienced in politics, but I've started to see how these guys operate. They paint you as a minority. You can take evidence that's clear as day that there's something, going on that's not right, and point it out, and you're a conspiracy theorist. You're a minority right-wing activist conspiracy theorist, and the media gets behind it and participates in this small group of people that mischaracterize the majority of the members of the party. The media, why is the media complicit in this effort to destroy the caucus convention system? Well, think about it. These primary elections that get run, they spend so much money. Candidates spend so much money advertising. They do their television ads. There will be far more primary election candidates that have to spend this money in order to get out in front of the electorate. But I would contend that that isn't the main reason why we're seeing the media get so ardently behind this. And it's because if the average person in the general election spends 3 hours vetting candidates, how much influence does the media have over their perception of candidates? Unbelievable amount of weight, right? So we are giving, I'm just going to throw out a number, as I don't have a real one, but I'll say, I would guess somewhere around 25%. The media now controls 25%, roughly speaking, of who's going to represent Utah in politics from now on. That power is huge, 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 huge. And the proponents of SB 54 want to convince us that we're broadening the base, we're making everybody's vote count. But it's just not the reality of it. So anyway, I'm probably preaching to the choir here to some extent. So we've talked through some of these things. The reason I love the caucus convention system, it keeps money from being the dominant factor in politics. Let's see. How much time do I have, by the way?
40 minutes, 30 minutes.
Oh, wow. Okay, we got some time. Okay.
Are we going to have time for responses and questions?
Yeah.
He was going to field them at his own. He was going to field the questions as he went along.
But a lot of the questions are coming up in what he's presenting.
Well, yeah, but I've got a lot of questions that I would like to ask him in the proposal that this group could hear another viewpoint. Because
Great.
a lot of these things that we're hearing are not totally accurate.
Okay. I'll make sure there's 10 minutes at the end to talk about some of these things, okay? So caucus convention system, one of the nice things about it, because it removes money as the dominant factor in politics, it gives a lot of people that don't have money access to the system to be able to run. Jason Chaffetz, I believe he spent $10,000 to win the nomination at the convention. And so you see that, pretty much anybody can go out and raise $10,000. But if you look at races, if you look at the trajectory of spend in US congressional races over the last 8 years, it is crazy what's happening. It's, I think, $2.5 million now per congressional race, the average in Utah. So we're already seeing the money needing to be spent skyrocketing, which gives a very unfair advantage to incumbents who have access to the PACs and to the lobbyists and to whatever. We've talked about the media and the undue influence there. I know from personal experience, I felt like in 2010, I made a difference. My voice was heard. And maybe I don't want to do it every year, and I'll trust you guys the next year and a different group the next cycle. But it really gives us a chance for our voice to be heard, literally. In my caucus meetings, being able to stand up, because I still go to my caucus meetings the last 6 years, but I've been able to speak up and say things and see my neighbors nod their heads and some go like this, and it's a great experience that I think brings communities together. This is one of the things that I think is often overlooked with the Caucus-Convention system. And by the way, there's this perception that Count My Vote isn't trying to really destroy the Caucus-Convention system. They're trying to buddy up next to it, and we have a better system if we have two options. Well, the reality is that people are not going, if the vetting, the rigorous vetting that all of you do doesn't matter because a candidate goes around the process, it undermines your desire and your willingness to be here at 10 a.m. in the middle of a week and vet these candidates. The new Count My Vote initiative actually backs convention up, or caucuses up, before the legislative session ends. So you don't have the chance to even know how the legislature votes by the time you're choosing your delegates in caucus meetings. So there's just a very systematic effort to undermine and destroy the system that we have. But I believe that the Caucus-Convention system, one of its greatest strengths is its ability to allow us to organize and be able to fight to maintain and to preserve our constitutional freedoms. If you look at the structure of it, we have a chair, we have state central committee members, we have legislative chairs, we have precinct chairs, and then we have caucus attendees. And there is a system that if we need to mobilize and get people out to picket or to do whatever else or to rise up against a government that's becoming too intrusive, we have this structure to mobilize to do it. And if we let the Caucus-Convention system go and we're just voting at the primary, that whole structure disappears that allows us to get organized and to be able to fight back against an over-intrusive government. And then we talked about just the ability to vet candidates at such a deep level. Do we have any questions up to this point? We could take a little break right here.
Isn't it pretty telling, though? I'm from downtown Salt Lake City, and I came all the way down here because of this conversation. But it's pretty telling that for 16 to 18 years, the Count My Vote has been pushed by the very staunch Democrats downtown. And they were coming door to door, pushing that so long ago. And now those same people who have been pushing it have the last election 2 years ago. There is George Soros money and a lot of Clinton money that was putting billboards and advertisements in newspapers and everything else. And I think it's very telling if the Democrats have spent that long trying to push it.
Yes, sir.
Just one observation. A person came to our door seeking petition signatures. We asked, are you employed to do this? Yes.
Yeah, the signature hurdle, some perceive it to be this indication of support, and it is not. I've said this before, and maybe this is there's a little hyperbole in the statement, but I really believe you can get Satan on the ballot for $7 a signature. Like it is not an indication of any sort of support, and I'll tell you why. I went to the company that distributed the Count My Vote petitions this year, and I said, hey, would you guys bring our petition for Keep My Voice Around? And they're like, oh yeah, we can carry both at the same time. And I'm like, wait, what? Because they're diametrically opposed. And I said, what percentage of people would you guess would sign both? And he told me 90% will sign both. So, and there's a lot of recordings if you go out and Google of these people and what they tell people at the door. I mean, you won't believe it. Like, sign this so kids can get their school lunches. And I mean, it's just crazy. And people are like, yeah, I'll help you out, sure, whatever, at the grocery store, whatever. And that's what's going on. So again, signature gathering is not vetting. It is a financial hurdle that if you have $250,000 and you want to run for Senate, you're on the primary ballot.
But it's even bigger than that because our county chairman, who ran unopposed because everybody thought, okay, this is moving someplace. he got in and he resigned before we even had a vice chairman because he said, this is way too hard. He was the one that was backing our governor to get signatures. He's really from Count My Vote. And he stepped down because he thought that he was going to get up and say, this is what we need to do, and let everybody be part of the system, and everybody should be on the ballot. And so we're without a chairman right now, and we have to push back the Lincoln Day dinner and everything else. I mean, it's totally falling apart. The other thing, sorry.
No, please.
The other thing about Salt Lake County is that we have people who are attending the caucuses saying, yeah, but they're telling us that all of these other people can't really participate. And how do we know? Because we don't know our neighbors. We don't have a way to. Everybody is moving out. You know, they live in a place for 3 months or 6 months or something, and then they move out. And they say, how can I even get someone that's going to represent me? How am I going to know? And when I went in 2010, they said, are you sure you're in the right place? There were 4 seats for like 10 or 15 precincts. And I said, don't you have papers here? And they said, the guy said, in 30 years, I have not seen one person from this precinct. And there are people who say, I'm not going to put out precinct signs because then other people will come and they won't know how to vote. So I will be the delegate and I will go to both conventions and stuff like that. That's what it is in Salt Lake. And so these people, I'm finding people on the street and I say, come to the caucus. And so I called and I'm only saying from Salt Lake County because that's where I am.
And only your precinct, because other places in the county are not like that.
Salt Lake City, downtown Salt Lake City, but also going to those committee meetings.
But that's all under the caucus system.
It is under the caucus system, and it's because it's broken in Salt Lake because we are so Democrat.
We thank you for your input, but we do have a program here.
But it's not a lie. This is what's going on.
There's the passion of delegates on
Display right there. I love it. So, yes, sir, very quick.
Can I respond to some of the things that are set up now?
Can we do a minute? I'm just worried I won't be able to get through the content.
We've already had 5 or 10 minutes from some, and we've had 20 minutes from you.
Yeah.
So I would really like to express.
Yeah, give us a minute. Give us your minute rundown.
First of all, I'd like to congratulate you for the process you took to take the stance that you're taking. It's admirable, and it's just what ought to happen. I wish there were 100 more just like you. I went through that process, not with Mike Lee and Drinkwater, whatever his name is. I went through that same process with Orrin Hatch and Frank Moss. Okay? So it's been a lot longer. But I can tell you, since that time I've been active every year in the caucus system. So I love the caucus system and I know how good it is. But the thing that concerns me is in all of those years that I've been involved, I have never seen the Republican Party in such turmoil as it is today. And it's because of the process that this action is taking. It is tearing the party to pieces. And you say the Gang of 51 isn't a big factor, but the bylaw that was written at the State Central Committee, the meeting for that bylaw was called by 49 of those Gang of 51. And it passed by 48 votes. And they were all the votes that called the meeting. The meeting was called in the last 2 weeks of the legislature when the legislators that were members of the State Central Committee could not attend. And in the meeting previous to that, it was called 2 weeks before Christmas of all times to be a special meeting. It took them 2 hours to even come up with an agenda. Now, wait a minute, you say done, but this other person took a lot longer than that.
Unfortunately, we don't have time for everybody to take that long, but I appreciate the perspective, but let me address it really quick because I was in these meetings. So First of all, these meetings are not being called to circumvent a larger audience, to somehow push something through that wouldn't go through in a normal meeting. If you go and look, so go to keeputahfree.org, spend an hour or two if you really want to know what's going on, reading through the articles on there. If you'll look in the January 27th meeting, there was a motion to drop the SB 54 litigation. And again, we hear this narrative that it's this small extreme group. Well, there were 129 credentialed members at that meeting. How many people voted to drop SB 54? 3. Rob Anderson's wife, Daryl Acumen, and I forget the lady. There's a third one. But anyway, overwhelming. The reason these special meetings are being called is because we have and I'm not a politician, so I can just come out and speak truth, but we have a chair that's out of control. He's out of control. And we have to have special meetings to rein him in because he has no respect for the Constitution. He has no respect for the bylaws. Every time, literally, I can't even tell you how many times he literally will just... Here's an example. He asked me on February 20th in a text message, hey, where are we at getting the debt paid off? I sent him a message back and said, you know what? I've worked a deal out with Troopus, which he had about $85,000 of the debt. But I said I haven't been able to get a deal done with Marcus Mumford, which is like $280,000 of the debt. But I'm working really hard and I hope to have something done soon. And this is a couple of days after his big faux pas with Mitt Romney, where he comes out publicly and goes after Mitt Romney and then realizes really quickly when it shows up in 68 international newspapers that he had made a mistake. So he needed a political win. So literally the next morning, after I tell him I have not paid off the debt, he sends an email out to the entire Republican Party that all the debt's been paid off. And doesn't, not that I care, but doesn't mention my name and tells the whole party that I told you I would get us out of debt. And he sent this email out after he fought me, literally every step, everything he could do to prevent me from making this donation, literally he did, including putting provisions in the contract that said that I would be personally held liable for any malfeasance of the attorneys. So if they wanted to sue the attorneys for malpractice, I would basically have to pay the bill. And it just absurd things, right? And I can tell you this isn't an isolated experience. I could literally sit here and talk to you about 20 examples of our chairman directly lying to the party, to the delegates, to the state central committee members. In fact, I have recordings of him admitting that he colluded to get his wife a seat on the state central committee by telling somebody to withhold their resignation for 3 weeks after he said, no, I don't want to withhold my resignation. I officially resign. And Rob Anderson held it for weeks before Tyler Moss was able to resign. He got up in front of the State Central Committee and said that the Salt Lake Tribune reporter, Courtney Tanner, completely fabricated all the statements that he made about Mitt Romney until he found out Courtney Tanner recorded the conversation, wherein he quickly retracted his comments. He has circumvented this in the Constitution. The Constitution states that the CMB Committee, Constitution and Bylaws Committee, receives amendment proposals and sends some to the State Central Committee and some to the Convention. Well, they didn't send amendments that Rob Anderson wanted to go to the convention, and so Rob Anderson just took all of them and sent them all to the state delegates and bypassed the CMB committee's right to send amendment proposals one way or the other. And I could go on and on and on about where there's rule breaking and where there's violations, and this is what I wanted to talk about, and so it's a good segue, and that is corruption that's going on in the party. The corruption we have, there are a few reasons for it. One is nobody's fault. We have a very, very concentrated Republican population. And if you want to succeed in politics, you have to be a Republican. And there are a lot of people that deep down in the core of their hearts, they're Democrats. And they want to be a politician and want to win, and so they become Republicans. So we start out politics in Utah with a lot of people misrepresenting who they are. Right from the get-go, right when they check their voter registration form to say Republican, there's deceit and corruption. And then it gets worse. We've got a group, and I've talked about this widely, and I know this has drawn scorn, but we have a group in the state called Buckshot Caucus. And I won't say every single person in that group is corrupt, But I know somebody, a friend of mine just recently told me he got accepted into the group, and we're talking maybe 130 members in the Buckshot Caucus. And every time I turn around and bump into corruption in the state, Buckshot Caucus is involved, every single time. And I've seen multiple examples of corruption just in the last 3 to 4 months. So, but this guy told me, I'm like, why did you join that group? And he said, well, this is a powerful group. It's like 30% of the legislature. And they joke and they pass it off about how they just like drinking Diet Coke and eating bacon and all this stuff. And like, but you also helped fund the student walkouts in favor of diminishing Second Amendment rights. And this is not just a group of fun people trying to avoid, Facebook groups because they're so snarky and mean. Well, that's the assertion they make. These people have a liberal left agenda in many, I'm not saying every individual in the group does. Like you mentioned, Count My Vote is a left liberal agenda. Go to Keep Utah Free and look at just the last article. Yesterday it was posted, and there's a 10-minute segment of Kurt Bramble and Todd Weiler speaking on the floor in favor of passing SB 54. And they said, this is what they said, literally, like I listened to it and I can't believe my ears. They say, this bill isn't just Count My Vote. We added something extra special into it. And what we added in is now everybody in the state can vote in Republican primaries. Everybody in the state, both Bramble and Todd Weiler, are just elated. They're gloating over that we improved Count My Vote. And now we can really dilute the voice of Republicans and lose all of our associative rights as a party. This is the agenda. These people doing this are not Republicans, okay? I look at what the lengths these people are willing to go to deceive us. And I'm telling you, they will lie, lie, lie. They will cheat, cheat, cheat. And when you point it out, you're wearing a tinfoil hat. And I'm saying when you have evidence, clear as day evidence, literally a statement, Rob Anderson posted in a chat room, I think we're going to try to institute a new constitution and bylaws at convention this year. Okay? He puts that in a chat group. I posted it on Facebook. Thought people would want to know about it.
That's evil.
People come out of the woodwork and say, oh, you're a tinfoil hat, you're a conspiracist. I'm like, he wrote it with, please explain to me any other meaning. Just help me, take some far-fetched idea of what he could have meant that was innocuous and help me understand. And literally nobody had even a theory of what else it could mean. And so this is what's going on. When I stepped forward, literally within 2 weeks, I was a nobody in politics. I was a delegate in 2010. Within 2 weeks of me saying, hey, I'll pay off the debt, I'll fund the litigation, Todd Weiler, who has been, go and Google Todd Weiler, James Evans, the former party chair, donors, and see what comes up. Well, there's a big article about how James Evans is telling Todd Weiler, or saying to the media that Todd Weiler is telling donors to go away from the party. Donors won't, he doesn't want them to fund the party because funding the party is funding the litigation. Some may say that they're actually trying to bankrupt the party. There's a legal entity that was created by none other than Taylor Morgan, the CEO of Count My Vote, called the Republican Party of Utah. We're the Utah Republican Party, okay? He formed an entity called the Republican Party of Utah. And then we get videos from Chairman Anderson talking about how he's going to bankrupt, restructure, and reorganize the party, okay? We've got Todd Weiler, who, by the way, Todd Weiler was really good friends with Rob Anderson's wife in college, and it was through his wife he met Rob Anderson. So Rob Anderson and Todd Weiler are kind of doing the same dance on this one. But Todd Weiler's telling donors not to donate to the party. And why is that? We have Rob Anderson posting in the Buckshot Caucus Facebook group that he's been in conversations with the RNC to intervene, presumably to revoke our party's charter and to give it to a new party that doesn't have these pesky SEC members and this pesky gang of 51. So this is what's going on behind the scenes, you guys. Within 2 weeks of me stepping forward, Todd Weiler knew one person at Entrada, one employee, and he calls her up, and his son had taught her on his mission, and invited him to come to the Buckshot Caucus suite at a jazz game. Kind of random, right? So then at at that jazz game, and I have a recorded conversation of this, this woman started just becoming hounded and pounded by all the members of Buckshot Caucus. Okay, tell me about Dave. Tell me, looking for some angle, some dirt to pull up on me so they can attack me, because they've just spent years telling donors not to donate. And I come along and I bail out the party and I agree to fund the litigation. And so she as she's describing this conversation, and again, she's close family friends with the Weiler family. She referred to these people that were talking to her as hungry attorneys. She told them that a woman that I had broken up with, dated for 9 months, that I broke up with, that this woman was, we were on good terms, we were going on a trip together. Weiler calls up, leaves a voicemail and says, tell her not to go on the trip. We can get her $1 million if she'll make sexual harassment allegations against him. And there's a voice recording, right? So I give it to the police, and I give them another 30-minute conversation with the family friend of the Weilers, who wants nothing more than to protect Todd Weiler because, it's a close family friend. But all the evidence is there that this was politically motivated, that they were trying to do me harm for political reasons, which is the very definition of extortion. I give it to a detective in the Lehigh Police Department, and he closes the investigation immediately. I honestly felt like I was being interrogated when I met with him. And they close the investigation immediately and say that there's absolutely no evidence of extortion. Absolutely. Listen to the voicemail, right? I'm Todd Weiler's biggest political foe, right? Anyway, I don't have time to get, this is a small, tiny little example. Like, I grew up with 3 brothers. I got extorted every day growing up by my brothers, so I can handle it. It's not that big of a deal. But when these people, this group of Buckshot Caucus members, what they do is, regardless of a person's political ideology, they help each other preserve their power. That is the purpose of this group. And they will do it through any means necessary. Yes, ma'am.
I have a legitimate question.
Yes.
That is, I'm here because I've heard of all this corruption and of Rob Anderson's attempts at convention. And I'm going to state convention, and I want to know what to look for. I don't want to be co-opted into their, whatever they're doing.
Read all the bylaw changes.
So what can I look for so that I'm voting on the right side of things? And how can we help make it so that he can't just take resolutions and
Yeah. So thank you so much for that question, because I could have blabbed and never gotten to that. But the first thing that I'll say, that obviously you'll form your own opinions about the Gang of 51, but it's not. It's the vast majority of the SEC. And that's why there are 3 amendment proposals that were submitted by Carice Thompson, by Carolina Herron, and by Diane Christensen, all 3 of which are designed to gut the State Central Committee. Because the State Central Committee, it's the last bastion of hope we have to preserve our Caucus-Convention system. If these guys drop the lawsuit, we're toast. It's over. Yeah, Diane Christensen, Carolina Herron, and Carice Thompson. And again, if you look at these 3 proposals, you can tell all 3 were drafted by the same author. There's literally paragraphs copied from one proposal to the other. And we get in these online chat groups, and these 3 people literally deny that they had any conversations with anyone else when they wrote these proposals. One even threatened litigation over it. And I'm telling you, entire paragraphs copied and pasted.
I thought I reread, they repasted it, and then I realized, no, this is the exact same, over and over, 28 pages of
Yeah.
this crap. Yeah.
So, and Rob Anderson had to get these in, because this is their only hope, is to quiet the State Central Committee. A guy named Daryl Acumen, if you guys haven't heard that name, did you guys get these Gang of 51 emails?
From Utah GOP.
Yes. So this guy, Daryl Acumen, he's a real piece of work. His name used to be Daryl Bradshaw before he moved to Utah. But he sends out these emails, and he sets up these reply alls, where if somebody is upset and buys into his garbage, they can reply, and when they reply, it blasts it to all of the 51 people who called the meeting. And so there's like 1,000 people. He sends it to hundreds of thousands of people. These people respond, And probably about 1,000 of them respond, and it literally just swamps the inboxes of all these state central committee members weeks before the caucus night, as they're trying to prepare and get signs up and fill precincts with people where people moved. And so anyway, they do all this, and if you look at the video that they sent, it's, and I don't have time for this, but there's a video of where they make it look like the gang of 51's losing it, and they're out of control, and Chairman Anderson's having to call security into the meeting to drag a guy named Lane Beck out of the meeting. And if you're there at the meeting, what happened is there's a procedure in Robert's Rules called appeal from the ruling of the chair. And it's a legitimate process where basically Rob Anderson unilaterally invalidated. He said, I invalidate everything that happened in the completely perfectly called December meeting that took place. He invalidated all of it. And so Lane Beck stood up and he said, I appeal from the ruling of the chair. Now, if the chair ignores you 3 times when you say that, you can turn to the audience and you can propose the motion to the audience because the chair has just gone rogue, which is exactly what happened. So when Lane Beck turned to the audience, as per Robert's Rules, he calls in a sergeant-in-arms to come in and to forcibly remove Lane Beck from the meeting, drag him out. I think he even mentioned jail, bring him to jail or something. And so this is what, those who follow the rules get this treatment. That's what's going on. I can tell you that I've interacted with the Gang of 51, which is really 101, which we have at least one member here today. And I have never seen one of them suggest we do something where we lie, or where we cheat, or where we may hold our cards close to protect strategy of something, but we don't lie, they don't cheat, these are good people who, I talk to them like, why don't you run? They don't want to run for office. They want this machine to work.
And they're held to account by their neighbors and the people they go to church with and the people who voted them in.
Exactly. I've had guys like, you guys know Kirby Glad probably? Yeah. Man, he's on our side, but every time, if I propose one little thing that in some stretch case is a violation of Robert's Rules, he just shuts it down. These are rule followers. These guys will not pass an amendment or do something that is expedient in the moment at the risk of harming the party for the long term. They truly care about the long-term success of the party. Now, getting back to your question, what can a delegate do to be prepared? Well, first of all, get educated. Call up your state central committee members. Find out if they're really crazy nut jobs. And you'll find that they aren't. Second, don't vote for these 3 amendments, okay? Because they will destroy our party. And I won't go into the details of what they do, but essentially it dramatically reconfigures the state central committee instantly to give those few people who want Count My Vote to succeed the power in the state central committee, which right now they're only 30%. Oh, I actually didn't bring it, so we'll just suffer here. But I was going to get to this too. But no, this is good. So the next thing is there is a problem right now. On average, 111 people show up to a state central committee meeting. For a special meeting, about 70 people show up. So the threshold right now in the Constitution, in order to remove an officer who's not doing their job, is that you have to have 110 votes at an SCC meeting in order to get rid of them. So, sorry, it's 108 votes because some SCC members left recently. So 108 votes out of 111 average attendance. Well, that is an impossible threshold. Rob Anderson or any officer who's not doing their job literally can talk 2 people into voting to preserve their office position. And frankly, that's one of the reasons we're seeing so much corruption and so much brazenness in our leadership now, is because there's no penalty to them. They literally can do whatever they want. Rob Anderson put Kurt Bramble over the credentialing process at the state convention. He wanted Todd Weiler over rules, and the executive committee threw a fit, and so they instead got Buckshot Caucus member Claire Ellis, which there's things I like about Claire, but again, these people are all colluding to maintain power, and that's what's going to happen in the state convention. A woman named Carrie Dixon, who in a meeting, she's been the parliamentarian for years for the party, when the new group of officers were coming in this last year, she said, tell me what you want to get done with parliamentary procedure. Tell me what you want to get done, and I'll use parliamentary procedure to do it. So now you see a new bylaw gets passed in the State Central Committee. Oh, well, there's this Roberts rule that if it's illegal, then the bylaw it doesn't take effect. And so they invalidated the bylaw. The chair unilaterally changed and got rid of the bylaw out of the certified bylaws from the C&B committee and sent it to LG's office. He just decided to edit it, quoting a Roberts rule that wasn't even brought up in the meeting when the bylaw was passed. We have them circumventing the C&B committee. The list goes on and on. But ultimately what it comes down to is there is one really important amendment, and that is yes, Rob Anderson sent out the call to convention. In the Constitution, it says that the secretary's role to send out the call to convention. Not only will they won't give her the email list because they're afraid she might send out the call to convention with the correct amendments that were proposed or that were passed forward by the C&B committee. So that's the motivation for withholding the delegate lists. So I guess what I'll say is vote for the amendment proposal. I think the proposal lowers it, so 2/3, which is consistent with what the Senate has to do to remove a rogue president. 2/3 of attendees in a state central committee where at least 90 members are present. So none of this emergency meeting with 40 people to kick a chair out. It's a really safe threshold that is actually possible to remove somebody. And my hope is that it's not used to remove people, it's used to keep people behaving so they don't have to be removed. The other things that I'll say that are going to be tricks that you might expect, and I wish I could see their playbook, but I'm very concerned about cheating in the credentialing process. I think somebody should be there with a camera, a video recorder, videoing anybody that are given credentials so that we can go back and audit who was allowed to vote. I'm concerned, frankly, about the clickers, the voting systems. Again, just having seen these people will lie and cheat. They have there's no, it doesn't even give them pause to do these things. And so the clickers are a problem for me. If there's any motion that could be made to require people to stand up to vote, in addition to their clickers, so that we can at least eyeball it to see, that would be a thing that would be fantastic. They're using a voting app for credentialing, but not for actual voting. They're using the clickers to vote. So a chair is not supposed to make motions for the floor, but Rob Anderson doesn't like that rule. And so he will consistently he'll ignore motions, he'll make his own motions. One of the things that he likes to do is he likes to say, and so we will do this, and he'll, in a very muddled, soft voice, he'll say without objection. And so that without objection essentially is his way of a motion passing without actually voting on it. And so he did this back in the September meeting, as he said, all the committees will continue as they are now, all the committees in the party, without objection. And the next item of business, and not only does that violate the Constitution, because votes have to be held to reconfigure these committees every 2 years, but that's just the sort of thing, if you hear without objection from the chairman, everybody in unison scream objection. So anyway, I love Utah, and I was born in Montana. I came down here to go to school, but I've spoken for years in front of students and business groups, civic groups, about how great it's been to run a business here in the state of Utah. And I truly feel that way. I think the people are phenomenal here. I think we have had, to some extent, fiscally conservative governance, although I think we could do much better. Having a front row seat to see the attacks where people have come after me because I've taken a stand. has been shocking to me. And I have said this before, but I truly, it's the first time in 2 decades that I've lived here in Utah that I feel embarrassed to be a Utahn. And it's shocking to me that with such good people here, and I know that because so many of them work for me, that we've allowed this sort of corruption into our government. And I think we have a tendency as a people, there's so many great things about Utahns, but I also think we have a tendency sometimes to give too much deference to our leaders and to not call them out and to not question them when they need to be questioned. We look through rose-colored lenses. We hear their trite explanations for their lies and their deceit, and we buy into it, and we just can't do it anymore. I feel like we are fighting in the courts for our associative rights as a party to choose who we want to be in our party. And yet I feel like we're not using those associative rights to kick the people out of the party who are violating our platform and who are attempting to, from the outside, if we as a party decide we want signature gathering, let's do it. But Democrats in the legislature and Democrats at the poll booth have no business deciding how we as a party choose our candidates. And I think we should all be able to agree on that we have that right. Well, we also have the right, if people are going to externally try to rewire, reconfigure, and revoke the rights we have as a party, they need to be removed from the party, in my opinion. And maybe that's an extreme perspective, but I'll share it because I'm not running for office. So, anyway. Yes, sir. So now we have a few minutes for questions.
You can take it.
Okay. 12:30, look at that, wow.
Let me first just apologize to you, Dave, and thank you for what I've heard today. You can tell by my nature and by my presentation a minute ago that I get pretty caught up in my beliefs. But I have heard things from you today that almost persuaded me to believe something that I could live another way. I still have feelings about having 2 paths to candidacy that I support, but I really appreciate hearing from you your view on things that have happened with the leadership of the party. And that's going to cause me to dig a lot deeper than I've done thus far. And I apologize to you if I've come across offensive. But I appreciate the things that I've heard from you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.